The massive council chamber gleamed under the light of 3 artificial suns. 200 species of the Galactic Council sat in their designated positions, their bodies of various shapes and sizes filling the tiered seats that stretched up toward the distant ceiling. In the lowest tier, almost hidden in the shadows, sat James Smith, the human representative. For the past 4 hours, Smith had listened to the council debate about imposing yet another restriction on human expansion. His face remained calm, but his knuckles had turned white from gripping the armrests of his chair. The humans have once again exceeded their assigned resource quotas, announced Representative Mill, a tall being with crystalline features that sparkled as he spoke. We propose additional oversight and restrictions on their mining operations. Smith looked up at the towering amphitheater of alien faces. For 300 years, humanity had played by their rules. They had accepted the unfair trade agreements, the technology restrictions, and the constant supervision, all because they had been told it was for the greater good of galactic stability. "If I may speak," Smith said, his voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to the humans speaking up during major sessions. The humans have proven time and again that they cannot be trusted with unrestricted access to resources, interrupted Representative Fax, his gelatinous form rippling with what passed for emotion among his kind. They are too unpredictable, too aggressive in their expansion. Smith stood up slowly. The movement drew every eye in the chamber. Humans rarely stood during council sessions. It was considered a sign of aggression by several member species. For 3 centuries, he began, his voice steady, humanity has attempted to work within this system. We have followed your rules, accepted your restrictions, and tried to prove ourselves worthy of equal standing. Today, I realize we were wasting our time. A murmur ran through the chamber. The council leader, an ancient being who appeared as a floating collection of light points, moved forward. "Representative Smith, you will resume your seat," the leader commanded. "No," Smith said simply. "I won't." The murmur became a roar of voices. Smith walked toward the center of the chamber floor, his footsteps echoing. He reached into his pocket and removed a small data crystal, holding it up so all could see. "This contains humanity's formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council," he announced. The chamber fell silent. "We will no longer accept the role of children being scolded by their elders. We will no longer beg for permission to use our own resources, develop our own technology, or explore our own potential. This is unprecedented," shouted someone from the upper tiers. "It cannot be allowed." Smith placed the crystal on the central pedestal. "It's not a request. It's a notification. Humanity is leaving the table. If you do this," the council leader warned, its lights pulsing with agitation, "you will lose all protection under council law. All trade agreements will be void. You will be alone." A small smile crossed Smith's face. "We've always been alone here. The only difference is that now we're choosing it." He turned and walked toward the chamber's massive doors. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at the assembled representatives. "We will make our own path," he said clearly. "Remember this moment. Remember that you had a chance to treat us as equals, and you chose not to. Whatever happens next, remember that you created this situation." The doors closed behind him with a final, resounding boom. In the stunned silence that followed, Representative Fax let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "Let them go. What can one species do against the combined might of the Council?" The Council leader's lights dimmed slightly. "Perhaps nothing," it said, "but I have studied human history. They have a habit of doing the impossible when others tell them they can't." The session resumed, but something had changed. A current of unease ran through the chamber, a feeling that something significant had just happened. Most dismissed it, some worried. None of them realized that they had just witnessed the beginning of the end of the Galactic Council's power. In the space station's docking bay, James Smith boarded his ship. As he lifted off, he sent a simple message to Earth. "It's done. We're free." The real question was, What would humanity do with that freedom? 3 months after humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council, the first cracks began to appear in the carefully maintained order of galactic commerce. The Council's monthly trade review meeting started as usual in the Great Chamber. Representative Mill stood at the central podium, his crystalline form reflecting the artificial light as he presented the standard trade reports. Everything seemed normal until he reached page 17. "There appears to be a discrepancy," he said, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "The outer rim trading routes are showing a 15% decrease in traffic." The council leader's lights flickered with interest. "Explain." Mill's crystal surfaces rippled as he analyzed the data. "Several independent trading vessels have altered their traditional routes. They appear to be taking longer paths that pass through human space." "Irrelevant," declared Representative Fax, his gelatinous form swelling with dismissal. "Minor fluctuations in trade patterns are common." But the next day, more reports arrived. The Merchant Guild of the Perseus Arm reported that human traders were offering rates 30% lower than council-approved merchants. Their ships were faster, their crews more efficient, and most surprisingly, they were sharing their improved engine designs with any independent traders who asked. In the council's private chamber, the senior representatives gathered for an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense as they reviewed the growing list of anomalies. "The humans are violating standard trade protocols," argued Representative Fax. "They're offering technology without proper oversight. This cannot be allowed." The council leader's lights pulsed thoughtfully. "We no longer have authority over human actions. They operate outside our jurisdiction. Then we must force them to comply." Fax's form rippled with agitation. An older representative, known simply as the Observer, spoke up from his corner. His species was among the first to join the council millennia ago. "Force them? With what authority? They left legally. They broke no laws. And now, they're simply trading." The chamber fell silent as a junior aide rushed in, carrying a new report. The council leader's lights dimmed as they read it. "The Mining Confederation of Sector 7 has announced they're opening direct trade negotiations with human systems." The leader announced. "They're considering leaving the council's trade agreement." Panic rippled through the chamber. Sector 7 controlled 30% of the galaxy's rare mineral production. If they broke away from council trade agreements, others might follow. On the edges of human space, the changes were even more apparent. Small trading posts that had once been quiet backwaters were becoming bustling ports. Human ships came and went freely, their holds full of goods and their captains eager to trade. But more than that, they'd brought something the council had always feared: ideas. In a busy spaceport bar on the frontier world of Haven, an alien trader named Kex watched a human merchant draw a crowd. The human was showing them modified engine schematics, explaining how simple changes could improve their ship's efficiency by 40%. "But the council says these modifications are dangerous," one trader protested. The human shrugged. "Test them yourself. We'll even help you install them. No charge, no contracts, no strings." Kex had been trading for 30 years. He'd never seen anything like this. The council's power had always been based on control of technology, of trade routes, of information. But the humans weren't trying to control anything. They were giving knowledge away. Back in the council chamber, the Observer watched the latest trade reports scroll across his screen. The numbers were clear. In just 3 months, traditional trade routes were shifting, established patterns were breaking down, and more importantly, information was flowing freely for the first time in centuries. "They're not trying to break us," he muttered to himself. "They're simply showing others that our rules can be broken." Outside the council's mighty halls, change was spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Small at first, but growing. The humans hadn't declared war, hadn't made threats, hadn't tried to seize power. They had done something far more dangerous. They had shown that another way was possible. And the galaxy was watching. 1 year after humanity's departure from the council, The galaxy's economic landscape had transformed beyond recognition. The change that sent the final shockwaves through the Council's economic system came on an ordinary day, through an ordinary announcement. "Attention all trading vessels," the broadcast began, transmitted simultaneously from every human spaceport. "The United Human Systems is pleased to announce the implementation of our new quantum fold drive. All ships docking at human ports will be eligible for free upgrades. Estimated fuel savings, 80%. In the Council chamber, the announcement played on repeat as representatives argued over its implications. The Council's economic experts huddled in corners, running frantic calculations on their devices. Representative Mill's crystalline form had lost its usual luster. "This is impossible," he declared. "Our best engineers say this level of efficiency cannot be achieved safely." And yet, the Observer noted dryly, human ships are already using it, as are their trading partners. The Council leader's lights pulsed rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. On the massive screens surrounding the chamber, real-time trade data showed markets plunging into chaos. The Council's carefully maintained shipping monopolies were becoming worthless overnight. In a bustling spaceport on the edge of what was now called free space, a veteran trader named Max watched as engineers installed the new drive on his ship. He'd been skeptical at first. Council propaganda had always painted human technology as crude and dangerous. But the proof was in the numbers. "Your fuel costs will drop to almost nothing," the human engineer explained, wiping grease from her hands. "The maintenance is simple. We'll teach your crew everything they need to know." "Just like that?" Max asked. "No contracts. No exclusive deals." The engineer smiled. "Just a suggestion to remember who helped you when others wouldn't." Across the galaxy, scenes like this played out thousands of times. Small trading companies, long squeezed by Council regulations and monopolistic practices, suddenly found themselves able to compete with the largest shipping corporations. The effect rippled through every market, every trade route, every economic transaction. In the Council's emergency session, Representative Thax's gelatinous form had turned a sickly color. "We must ban all trade with human systems. They're destroying centuries of carefully maintained economic stability." "With what leverage?" the Observer asked quietly. "Already, 40% of independent traders have adopted their technology. They can move goods at a fraction of our costs. If we ban trade, we only hurt ourselves." The numbers on the screens told the story. Council-affiliated shipping companies were losing contracts by the thousands. Smaller species, long relegated to the margins of galactic trade, were establishing direct trading relationships with human systems and each other. But it wasn't just about shipping costs. Human markets were open, transparent, and free from the complex web of regulations and hidden fees that had characterized Council trade. Information flowed freely, allowing traders to make informed decisions without relying on Council-approved brokers. In the outer rings of a gas giant, where independent miners had long struggled under Council quotas, a group gathered around a comm unit. The prices for their ore had doubled in human markets, where they could sell directly to manufacturers without going through Council intermediaries. "They're not just changing the rules," one miner said, watching the latest market updates. "They're showing us the rules were never needed in the first place." Back in the Council chamber, the Observer watched as another major trading consortium announced its intention to operate under human trade protocols. The Council's economic model, maintained for centuries through careful control and manipulation, was unraveling in real time. "We always thought our strength was in maintaining order," he mused to the nearly empty chamber. Most representatives had rushed off to deal with the crisis. "We never considered that our order was actually stagnation in disguise." Outside, the galaxy's economy continued its rapid transformation. The humans hadn't just created a better system. They'd released the potential that the Council had always kept suppressed. And as their influence grew, one thing became increasingly clear: this was only the beginning. The economic heart of the galaxy was shifting, and the Council could only watch as their power slipped away, one trade deal at a time. The research facility on New Haven buzzed with activity. In what would have been strictly forbidden under council rule, scientists of 12 different species worked side by side, sharing ideas freely. At the center of the main laboratory, a holographic display showed their latest breakthrough, a medical regeneration device that worked on any species. The council said cross-species medical technology was impossible, said Dr. Green, watching the device heal injuries in real time. Turns out they just didn't want anyone trying. In the council chamber, the mood was grim. Representative Mill's crystalline form had developed stress fractures as he delivered the latest report. In the past month alone, human research facilities have released 47 new technologies, all open source, all freely available. They're not even filing patents. The council leaders' lights had dimmed to almost nothing. How many of our scientists have defected to human space? We stopped counting at 10,000, Mill replied. They're calling it the Great Migration of Minds. The observer watched the proceedings with growing interest. Unlike his fellow council members, he'd begun to understand why this was happening. The council had always controlled innovation through careful regulations, patents, and restricted research permits. Humanity had simply opened the gates. In a research lab on the Outer Rim, Professor Tix, formerly a council-certified researcher, worked alongside colleagues from Earth. Their current project would have been deemed too dangerous under council rules. Clean energy generation using controlled quantum reactions. But it's not dangerous at all, Tix explained to a visiting journalist. The council just said it was to maintain their energy monopoly. Here, we test everything openly. Share all our data. Let others verify our work. The humans had introduced something the galaxy hadn't seen in millennia. The scientific method, unrestricted by political concerns. Back in the council chamber, Representative Thax had turned an alarming shade of green. They've released the designs for personal shield generators. Those were restricted technology. Were they restricted because they were dangerous? The observer asked mildly. Or because they made individual citizens harder to control? The silence that followed was deafening. Across human space and beyond, innovation centers were springing up like wildfire. Species that had been told for generations that they lacked the capacity for advanced research were making groundbreaking discoveries. The Council's technological monopolies, maintained for centuries through careful control of information, were crumbling. In a bustling research park on Mars, a young alien scientist named Rix worked on improving faster-than-light communication. Her species had been labeled technically limited by the Council, restricted to basic research only. The humans just asked what I wanted to study, she said, adjusting her equipment. No permits required, no forms to fill. Just pure science. The Council's emergency session stretched into its third day. The screen showed an endless stream of new patents and innovations being released into the public domain. Worse, most came from collaborative teams of multiple species, proving the Council's long-standing claims about the dangers of unrestricted cooperation were false. They've destroyed centuries of careful technological control, Thax declared. They freed centuries of suppressed potential, the observer corrected. And now we're seeing the cost of our control. The innovations weren't just in technology. New art forms emerged from cross-species collaboration. Cultural exchanges led to revolutionary developments in music, literature, and philosophy. Ideas flowed freely across formerly rigid boundaries. In the human research facility on New Haven, Dr. Green watched as another breakthrough was uploaded to the Galactic network. This one was a revolutionary water purification system, developed by a team representing 15 species. The Council always said different species couldn't work together effectively, she mused. Turns out we just needed the freedom to try. The wave of innovation continued to spread, unstoppable and accelerating. Each breakthrough led to 3 more. Each collaboration sparked dozens of new ideas. The galaxy was awakening from a long intellectual slumber, and the Council could only watch as their carefully maintained walls of regulation crumbled before the tide of unrestricted progress. Knowledge, once carefully controlled, now flowed freely through the stars. and there was no way to put it back in the bottle. The council chamber, once filled to capacity, now echoed with emptiness. Nearly a third of the seats stood vacant, their former occupants having formally withdrawn their membership. The latest departure had just been announced. The mercantile worlds of the Perseus arm hereby dissolve all ties with the Galactic Council, read Representative Mill, his crystalline form dulled with stress. They have signed a mutual cooperation agreement with the United Human Systems. The council leader's lights flickered weakly. How many does that make this month? 7 major systems, the observer replied, and 23 minor ones. The migration is accelerating. In the bustling ports of human space, ships arrived constantly, carrying diplomats, traders, and entire families looking for new opportunities. The human worlds had become gathering points for species seeking freedom from council restrictions. On New Terra, a sprawling diplomatic complex hosted representatives from dozens of formerly council-bound worlds. They came not to argue or compete, but to learn how to cooperate without the council's oversight. "We never realized how much the council limited us," said Ambassador Lex, whose species had been among the first to leave. "They didn't just control trade and technology. They controlled how we thought about ourselves and each other." The council's attempt to impose sanctions on departing members had backfired spectacularly. Each punitive measure only pushed more species toward independence. The human systems, with their open borders and free exchange of ideas, offered an attractive alternative to the council's rigid control. In orbit around Jupiter, a massive space station served as a cultural exchange center. Species that had been kept separate by council policy now mixed freely, sharing art, music, food, and ideas. The station's markets buzzed with activity as traders from across the galaxy discovered new opportunities. The council told us for centuries that different species couldn't coexist without strict regulation. A station administrator explained to a newly arrived group. "Look around." They were wrong. Back in the council chamber, Representative Thax's gelatinous form trembled with rage. "We must take military action. This exodus threatens everything we've built." "With what fleet?" the observer asked calmly. "Half our shipyards have declared independence. Our best engineers left months ago. Even our weapons suppliers are trading with human systems now." The screens surrounding the chamber told the story. Across the galaxy, the carefully maintained boundaries between species were dissolving. New trade routes formed, new alliances emerged, and new possibilities opened up daily. On a frontier world that had once been a minor council outpost, a marketplace flourished. Species that had once been forbidden to interact now worked side by side. Children of different races played together in streets that buzzed with a dozen languages. The council said we needed their protection, a local governor remarked, watching the scene. "But look at us now. We're protecting ourselves, helping each other. We just needed the chance to try." The migration wasn't just physical. Ideas, cultures, and dreams flowed freely between worlds. Species that had been labeled as primitive by the council were revealing depths of wisdom and knowledge that had been suppressed for generations. In a private meeting room adjacent to the council chamber, the observer met with the council leader. "We could have prevented this." The leader's lights pulsed sadly. "If we had only listened when the humans tried to tell us change was needed." "The humans didn't cause this," the observer replied. "They just showed everyone what was possible without our control. The galaxy was ready for freedom. We just didn't want to see it." Outside, another fleet of ships departed council space, heading toward human territory. They carried not refugees, but pioneers, species eager to build something new, freed from the restrictions that had bound them for so long. The Great Migration continued, unstoppable and growing. Each departure weakened the council further and strengthened the new networks forming in human space. The balance of power wasn't shifting. It had already shifted. The galaxy was transforming, one species at a time, and the council's age of control was coming to an end. The grand doors of the council chamber slammed shut as Representative Mill stormed out, leaving cracks in the marble floor where shards of his crystalline form had fallen. Inside, chaos reigned as the remaining council members shouted accusations at each other. "You were taking bribes from energy corporations." Representative Thax's gelatinous form bubbled with rage, while preaching about council regulations. "And you," another member pointed tentacles at Thax. "You've been secretly trading with human systems while voting for sanctions against them." The council leader's lights had dimmed to barely a flicker, unable to maintain order in what was supposed to be the galaxy's most dignified chamber. In the public viewing gallery, the observer watched as centuries-old alliances crumbled in minutes. The truth was spilling out, and it was uglier than anyone had imagined. "We've discovered unauthorized accounts in the Outer Rim banks," announced an audit drone, its mechanical voice cutting through the chaos. 97 council members have been diverting public funds for personal use. The revelation sparked another round of accusations. Species that had been allies for generations now turned on each other, exposing long-hidden corruptions and betrayals. Outside the chamber, news networks broadcast the meltdown across the galaxy. In human space and beyond, billions watched as the council tore itself apart. "They spent centuries telling us we needed their guidance," a trader commented, watching the feeds in a busy spaceport bar. "Turns out they were the ones who couldn't be trusted." The council's private security force, once feared throughout the galaxy, began deserting their posts. Their commander, a veteran of countless council operations, submitted a simple resignation. "We can no longer serve an institution that has lost its way." In the council's secret archives, investigators discovered thousands of suppressed reports, evidence of technological breakthroughs that had been hidden, peaceful species labeled as dangerous because they questioned council authority, and countless lives lost to maintain the council's power. Back in the chamber, Representative Thax made a final desperate attempt to restore order. "We can still salvage this. We just need to unite against the human threat." "What threat?" The observer finally spoke up. "The humans haven't attacked anyone. They haven't imposed restrictions. They haven't demanded obedience. They simply offered an alternative to our control, and look how many chose it." The screens around the chamber displayed the latest numbers. Council authority now extended to less than 20% of its former territory. Most species had either aligned with human systems or declared independence. In a quiet corner of the chamber, two ancient rivals, the Fire Brothers of Nexus and the Ice Shapers of Glacius, sat together, watching their worlds withdraw from council space simultaneously. "Our peoples fought for 10,000 years, the Fire Brother said softly, "because the council told us we were natural enemies. And now we find out they were profiting from our conflicts all along," the Ice Shaper replied. The council's last attempt to maintain power, a proposed emergency measure to freeze all withdrawals, failed spectacularly when it was revealed that even the council leader had been preparing to secretly relocate to human space. The leader's lights finally went dark. "This session is adjourned," they announced, "perhaps permanently." As council members filed out of the chamber, many for the last time, the observer remained in his seat. He had witnessed the council's founding ages ago, and now he was witnessing its end. A junior aide approached him. "Sir, what happens now?" The observer looked at the empty chamber, its grandeur unable to hide the corruption that had rotted it from within. Now we learn to live without walls, without restrictions, without lies." In human space, news of the council's crisis was met not with celebration, but with quiet determination. They had not sought to destroy the council. They had simply shown the galaxy that there was another way to live. As the council's power crumbled, something new was already taking its place. Freedom, cooperation, and hope. The age of control was ending. The age of possibility was just beginning. 5 years after humanity left the council table, the massive council chamber had transformed. Where once stern representatives debated regulations, now young aliens of various species wandered with wide eyes, reading historical placards and interactive displays. "And this," the tour guide explained to a group of school children, is where the last council session was held. Notice the crack in the floor, made by Representative Mill during the final crisis. The former council headquarters had become the galaxy's most visited museum. Its halls, once filled with political schemes and secret deals, now served as a reminder of how things used to be. In the orbit of Earth, a new structure had taken shape. The Galactic Exchange Center didn't impose rules or demand obedience. Instead, it provided a place for species to meet, trade, and solve problems together. The difference, explained Tom Wilson, Earth's representative to the exchange, is that we don't tell anyone what to do. We just help them talk to each other. The exchange's main hall buzzed with activity. Species that the council had labeled as enemies for centuries now worked together on joint projects. Trade flowed freely, uninhibited by artificial restrictions or political agendas. In what had once been restricted council space, new civilizations flourished. The quantum fold drive had made travel so cheap and easy that isolation was no longer possible or desired. Ideas and cultures mixed freely, creating new forms of art, music, and technology that would have been impossible under council rule. A small ship landed at the exchange center's dock. Its captain, one of the few remaining former council representatives, looked around in wonder. "We always said this would lead to chaos," he admitted to the docking officer. "But look at this. It's not chaos at all. It's life." The galaxy had changed in ways few had imagined possible. The council's careful categories and restrictions had been replaced by something more organic, a network of relationships based on mutual benefit and genuine cooperation. In a classroom on New Terra, students from 20 different species studied together. Their teacher, a veteran of the council wars, watched them work on a group project. "The council told us for centuries that different species couldn't understand each other," she said to a visiting observer. "These kids prove them wrong every day." The old council's prediction of economic collapse had proven spectacularly wrong. Without artificial restrictions, trade had exploded. New markets emerged, new industries flourished, and wealth spread more evenly across the galaxy. In the former council chamber, now the central exhibit of the museum, a holographic display showed the galaxy's transformation. Red lights marked former council control points, gradually fading to green as freedom spread across the stars. "The interesting thing," the museum curator explained to a group of visitors, "is that humans never tried to take control. They just showed us we didn't need anyone controlling us at all." The curator pointed to a small display case containing the data crystal that James Smith had left behind when humanity walked away from the council. Its simple message, "We will make our own path," had become one of the most famous phrases in galactic history. In orbit around Jupiter, the largest shipyard in human space worked at full capacity. But instead of warships or patrol vessels, it produced exploration ships, science vessels, and trading craft. Species that had once been enemies now worked side by side, building tools for peace rather than war. Back at the Exchange Center, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for their annual meeting. Unlike the old council sessions, there were no assigned seats, no hierarchy, no demands for obedience. "We've learned something important," Wilson addressed the gathering. "The galaxy doesn't need rulers. It needs neighbors, friends, partners." In what had once been the council leader's private chamber, now a quiet corner of the museum, the observer sat alone. He was among the last of his kind, old enough to remember the council's founding, its height, and its fall. "They feared freedom," he told a curious young alien who recognized him. But freedom was what the galaxy needed all along. Outside, the stars shone brightly on a galaxy transformed. Not by force, not by rules, but by the simple act of walking away from control and choosing freedom instead. The council had fallen, but the galaxy had risen in its place, brighter and more alive than ever before.